I moved temporarily to rural Iowa for work. The company I worked for assigned me to oversee construction equipment repairs on a wind farm project about 40 minutes outside the nearest town. Because the job was expected to last several months, they rented me an old farmhouse nearby instead of paying for a hotel long-term. At first, the place seemed peaceful. The house sat completely isolated in the middle of farmland. No nearby neighbors, no streetlights, no traffic at night, just fields stretching endlessly in every direction. The farmhouse itself was old but decent enough. 2 floors, creaking wooden floors, large back porch facing miles of empty land. During the daytime, I honestly enjoyed staying there. But the first night alone, I realized how isolated the property actually was. Once darkness hit, the entire area became pitch black. Not suburban darkness, real darkness, the kind where you can stand outside and barely see your own hands. Around midnight, my power briefly flickered because of a storm moving through the area. I remember sitting in the living room watching TV when everything suddenly went black for maybe 3 seconds. Then the lights returned. At the exact same moment the power came back. I noticed someone standing outside the front window. I physically jumped. The figure stood motionless roughly 20 feet from the house. Tall, broad shoulders, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. At first I assumed maybe it was one of the local farmers checking something nearby. But then I realized how insane that would be. It was after midnight during a thunderstorm, and whoever stood outside wasn't moving at all, just staring directly into the house. I got up slowly and walked toward the window. The second I got close, lightning flashed outside, and the yard was empty. No figure. Nothing. I remember laughing nervously afterward and convincing myself I imagined it during the power flicker. But later that night around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly to a sound downstairs. A loud creak, like someone stepping onto the hardwood floor. At first I stayed completely still listening. Another creak followed, then another. Slow footsteps moving through the first floor of the house. I grabbed my phone immediately. No signal, which wasn't unusual for that area, but at that moment it felt terrifying. The footsteps continued. Kitchen, living room, hallway, then stopped directly beneath my bedroom. I held my breath listening, and after several seconds, something touched my bedroom doorknob. Slowly, the knob turned halfway before stopping. I remember every muscle in my body locking up. Because I knew I'd locked that door before bed, the doorknob moved again. Longer this time. Then whoever stood outside softly knocked twice. Not aggressive, almost polite. I didn't answer. Neither did they. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps slowly walking away down the hallway. I waited nearly 10 minutes before finally forcing myself out of bed. I grabbed a wrench from my toolbox and opened the bedroom door carefully. The hallway was empty. Entire house empty. Every door locked from the inside. No broken windows. No signs of entry. Nothing. The next morning I told one of the local workers about it while we were eating breakfast at a diner. Instead of laughing, he got strangely quiet, then asked me, "You staying at the Wilcox farmhouse?" I said yes. The guy looked genuinely uncomfortable afterward. He told me the property had a reputation locally because previous renters frequently complained about someone walking around outside at night. Most people apparently blamed trespassers or pranksters, but according to him, the old farmer who owned the house decades earlier vanished mysteriously after repeatedly claiming someone was entering the property overnight. Nobody ever found him. That story stayed in my head constantly afterward. And over the next few weeks, things got worse. I'd come home from work and find doors slightly open. Kitchen lights turned on. Objects moved around subtly. Always small things. Things easy to question yourself over. Then one night around 1:30 a.m., I heard knocking at the front door. 3 slow knocks. I checked the upstairs window carefully. Nobody visible. But while looking outside, I noticed movement near the barn roughly 50 yards away. Someone standing beside it, watching the house. This time I knew I wasn't imagining things. I called out through the window asking who was there. No response. Then the figure slowly raised one arm and pointed toward the house. At that exact moment, the knocking started again. Behind me, inside the house, directly downstairs. I genuinely felt cold all over, because whatever I'd seen outside wasn't the thing inside. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom and stayed there with a wrench until sunrise. When morning finally came, I searched the house thoroughly. Nothing appeared stolen. But on the kitchen table sat something that absolutely hadn't been there before. A muddy boot print, perfectly centered on the table surface, as if someone had stepped onto it deliberately. I moved out 2 days later, and according to the property owner, the farmhouse has remained vacant ever since because renters refused to stay there longer than a few nights. A woman named Rachel worked overnight security at a warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. The job itself sounded easy. Sit at the front office, monitor cameras, check employee badges for late-night deliveries. Most nights Rachel worked completely alone from 11 p.m. until sunrise. The warehouse sat inside an industrial district mostly abandoned after midnight. Huge empty parking lots, dark loading docks, almost no traffic. At first, Rachel loved the job because it paid well and allowed her to study online between patrols. But around October, strange things started happening. It began with small incidents involving the security cameras. Certain cameras would flicker briefly around 2 or 3 a.m., always the same loading dock near the back of the building. Maintenance checked repeatedly and found no technical issues. Then one night Rachel noticed something strange while monitoring screens. A person standing near Dock 4. At first she assumed it was a driver arriving early, but after zooming the camera in, she realized the figure wasn't moving, just standing there facing the building, completely still. Rachel radioed one of the overnight forklift operators asking if anyone was outside. The operator replied no. By the time Rachel looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. The next evening it happened again. Same dock, same motionless figure. This time Rachel immediately reviewed nearby cameras trying to track where the person walked afterward. Nothing. The figure appeared on one camera, then vanished before reaching another angle. After about a week, Rachel became genuinely uncomfortable working alone, especially because the figure kept appearing closer each night, near the fence, then beside trailers, then directly outside loading doors, always motionless, always watching the building. Then came the night everything changed. Around 3:12 a.m., Rachel heard banging somewhere inside the warehouse. Not outside, inside. 3 loud metallic crashes echoing through the building. She assumed a pallet collapsed and grabbed her flashlight to investigate. The warehouse itself was enormous. Rows of towering shelves disappearing into darkness. Motion sensor lights turning on section by section as she walked. Rachel later admitted she already felt terrified before reaching the back aisles because the building suddenly seemed unnaturally quiet. No forklifts, no workers, nothing. Then she heard breathing, close breathing, somewhere nearby in the darkness between shelves. Rachel froze immediately. "Hello?" No response. Then one of the motion lights farther down the aisle activated suddenly. Someone stood there, tall figure, dark hoodie, completely still between shelves. Rachel backed away immediately and radioed for police. The figure slowly stepped backward out of the light, then disappeared. Rachel hurried toward the front office while police were en route. Halfway there, every warehouse light shut off simultaneously. Complete darkness. Rachel later said the silence afterward felt worse than the darkness itself. Then footsteps started, running footsteps, somewhere behind her in the warehouse. Fast, closing distance rapidly. Rachel sprinted. Motion lights flashed on one after another as she ran through aisles. And during one of those brief flashes, she saw the figure only feet behind her. Smiling, Rachel reached the security office and locked herself inside seconds before something slammed violently against the door. Police arrived minutes later and searched the warehouse extensively. Nobody was found, but officers did discover something deeply disturbing. Inside one unused storage section near Dock 4, they found signs someone had been living there secretly. Blankets, food containers, water bottles, and taped across one wall were printed photographs of Rachel taken from inside the warehouse over several weeks. Some showed her at the security desk, others during patrols. One photo had been taken through the office window from outside at night. But the creepiest discovery came afterward. Reviewing old footage, investigators noticed the motionless figure near Dock 4 had appeared on camera multiple times over nearly 2 months. Watching the building, studying routines, waiting. A guy named Trevor rented an isolated cabin in Montana after going through a breakup. According to him, he wanted complete solitude for a few days. No phone calls, no internet, no people. The cabin sat deep in the mountains, accessible only through a long dirt road. The owner described it as perfect for getting away from the world. Trevor arrived around evening. At first the place looked beautiful. Tall pine trees everywhere, small lake nearby, mountains surrounding the property. But almost immediately something felt strange. The cabin owner specifically warned Trevor not to leave food outside because people sometimes wander through the area. Trevor assumed he meant bears. Then the owner added, "If you hear knocking at night, ignore it." Trevor laughed awkwardly, assuming the guy joked around. The owner didn't laugh back. That first night Trevor stayed up late drinking whiskey beside the fireplace. Around 1 a.m., he heard whistling outside, faint whistling moving slowly through the trees. At first he ignored it. Then the whistling stopped directly outside the cabin. Complete silence followed. Then came knocking. 3 slow knocks against the front door. Trevor later admitted something about the rhythm immediately felt wrong. Too deliberate. Not the kind of knock someone uses normally. He approached the window carefully and looked outside. Nobody there. Then another knock came. This time against the side window beside him. Trevor jumped backward, and through the glass, he briefly saw a face outside, a man smiling. The expression looked completely unnatural. Wide, unblinking. Trevor yelled, asking what the hell the guy wanted. The man outside whispered something Trevor couldn't fully hear, then walked away into darkness. Trevor locked every window and tried convincing himself it was some drunk hunter messing around. But around 3 a.m., he woke up again, this time because of footsteps on the cabin roof. Slow footsteps moving overhead, back and forth, then stopping directly above the bedroom. Trevor grabbed a flashlight and checked outside through windows repeatedly. Nothing visible, but while scanning the woods, his flashlight briefly illuminated several figures standing between the trees. At least 4 people, watching the cabin. Trevor immediately shut off the flashlight. His heart was pounding so hard he later said he thought he might pass out. Then one of the figures whistled, and footsteps suddenly started surrounding the cabin outside. Crunching gravel, movement near windows, soft laughter. Trevor called 911, but couldn't get signal. Then came a voice from outside the bedroom wall. "You shouldn't be here alone." Another voice answered from farther away. "He won't leave now." Trevor spent the next several hours barricaded inside the bathroom, holding a hunting knife. And outside, people continued circling the cabin until sunrise. When daylight finally came, the woods appeared empty. But surrounding the cabin were footprints everywhere, dozens of them, and carved into the dirt beside Trevor's truck were the words, "Stay next time." Trevor left immediately afterward. Later, local police told him there had been multiple reports involving groups living illegally deep in the surrounding mountains. Groups known for targeting isolated cabins and travelers staying alone. But nobody was ever arrested, and according to officers, most victims were too terrified to stay long enough to identify anyone.